EFF policy on land
Yeah.
and nationalization.
Yeah.
And then after that, we'll do the one that now upsets the masses, which is your open border policy. If you can please clarify.
So the EFF's first cardinal pillar is land expropriation without compensation for equitable redistribution.
Yeah.
So this essentially means that all land must be expropriated to the custodianship of the state.
All land.
All land
All
must
land.
be expropriated. So
all 122 million
all
hectares
land
must go to government.
must be under the custodianship of the state.
Okay.
For equitable redistribution. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm going to take your house or the plot of your land that you're living in today, where your house is sitting. We're simply placing it under state custodianship, and then there's going to be a licensing process where the use of land must be justified through license.
Like a permission to occupy?
Like permission to occupy, permission to operate a business type of lease agreement.
Okay.
And custodianship of land under the state is nothing radically different. And I think that's the shocking part for people, because it's not under the custodianship of the state today. Who's the custodian of water in South Africa? It's the state. You don't know who owns water. It's the state. It's the state that ensures that you get water through your tap every day, because it's the custodian of that natural resource. So nothing is going to drastically change in terms of how you live on a day-to-day basis. It's just that there's corporations, there's individuals who have ownership of land in South Africa, sometimes don't use it at all, sometimes don't use it for the purposes that it's supposed to be used for, and sometimes have acquired it, and in most cases acquired it through land dispossession since the 1912 Land Act, and even before then. So there's a redistributive justice that needs to be practiced as well. So there needs to be an equitable process that is controlled and guided by the state, a competent and capable state, hopefully, that is going to be able to expropriate the land and then ensure that it redistributes it for necessary purposes, but also on equitable grounds, so that we can abolish so there's an affinity with townships that black people have that they need to do away with. We must abolish. No, black people fall in love with circumstance because we're able to make life in circumstance.
True.
There are certain things that we must be able to do away with. I make a very drastic argument. I don't like rural areas as a concept, because we were placed there so that we're as far away from industrialized sectors of society, as far away from jobs as possible. So the affinity we build with these locations, with these areas, is because we built families there, we've built friends there, we've found love there. We've built homes, we've built taverns, we've built places of socializing in there. But those are not some of those places are not places where you should be occupying. I mean, if you go to Cape Town, a person who's from abroad can go to Cape Town and never see the township and not know that it exists, because it is placed so far away. And this is the racial spatial planning that requires land expropriation as well. It's placed so far away from industry that you don't know that black people are even there. You don't know that Khayelitsha exists. You don't know that Down 2, Site B, and all of these places exist, because the social planning of South Africa, the spatial and land planning of South Africa, is based on racism and apartheid and land dispossession. So a state needs to mediate this conflict and this contradiction. And that is the simple thing that we're saying. I don't know why people are alarmed by that. I don't know why people are alarmed by nationalization. I don't know why people are alarmed by any of the EFF's policies, because they are practiced in many countries in the world, and there's not been proven to be detrimental to any economic growth or economic development.
I want to stay on land. The current model that the Kings have is the model you guys want. Because Kings have custodianship over land. Let's use Ngonyama Trust as the most popular example. 2.8 million hectares, and any individual who needs a house to stay, wants to farm, who wants to start a business, goes to a king chief to get a permission to occupy. And if they don't use it, or if their kids are not there, that land gets taken and it gets given
to someone else.
That's the model.
The difference between us and kings is that we're elected.
Okay. But that's the model.
It's a model.
Okay.
Because there's subsequent to the expropriation of land, there's going to be land courts within various districts and various locations within South Africa, but all entities of the state. But it's a model that we will practice.
No more private land ownership.
No more private land ownership.
And private property ownership?
No private property ownership. All land is under the custodianship of the state.
So I get a permission to occupy from the EFF government. They give me 100 hectares to farm,
100 years,
build
or 60
factories,
years.
As an example. I pass away, my son or my daughter is now working that land, and they decide, no, they want to move to New York. And they're not really using that land. You guys come and take the land, but you don't compensate for the property.
Nope. The state will find another purpose for that land.
No compensation for the property.
So land in terms of inheritance is going to be abolished.
The land I understand. I'm asking about the property, the development of that land. So I developed
what is developed on the land.
The buildings, the
property on your land we can have a conversation about, but that's not land. That is what you've developed on top of that land. There can be a conversation about that. I can't say I want to expropriate your factory.
Okay.
But your factory is on state land.
Okay.
So that land belongs to us. And if that land is no longer serving the purpose that you got a license for it for, then it must be redistributed to serve another purpose.
One of the examples that I'm aware of, because I've visited the place, is Hong Kong, where there's almost no private property land ownership.
Yeah.
And any business, because Hong Kong is one of the most expensive and it's got one of the highest GDPs per capita. People there are well off. They drive Ferraris and Lamborghinis, but they don't own the land. Everyone who operates there, lives there, is paying rent to the state, which also means they don't have to worry too much about tax. At least the type of taxes that we pay, because you pay rent for the land, and then they make sure that the land is productive for the people.
Yeah, Japan, Singapore, I think most of mainland China, same system.
Okay. Nationalization. I heard your Commander-in-Chief Julius Malema.
That's why I'm
clarifying on a platform. I was quite upset because this was not my understanding. It sounded like a sellout position. That nationalization doesn't mean taking over industries or taking over businesses, but it's more the state creating their own companies in construction, in mining, in financial services, etc. What is the EFF nationalization policy from an economic perspective outside of the land?
So nationalization refers to the transfer of commerce or certain spheres of sectors of markets to state control or ownership, right? So
state control
or ownership.
Okay.
So a lot of people like to get bogged down on ownership and don't want to talk about state control. And that is the aspect that I think the Commander-in-Chief was speaking to, that people did not want to sort of buy into, and what made it look like a sellout position.
We
don't want to own Anglo-American's mine, but we want to control that sector, and we don't do that now. The mining conglomerate in South Africa, the mining industry in South Africa is controlled by multinational conglomerates.
Correct.
It can be, so we don't want to own the conglomerates, we don't want to own the multinational companies, but we want to control that sector. And in order to control that sector, we must compete in that sector. In order to control that sector, also there must be a transfer of skills, and that's the form of nationalization. So if you go to the founding manifesto of the EFF, it talks about the transfer of ownership of the means of processing the minerals. So the expertise, the technical expertise, the technical infrastructure. This has been accumulated through monopoly in South Africa over centuries. And this monopoly is now monopolized and concentrated within the multinational mining conglomerates. Now, these are spheres that we might be able to expropriate, like properly nationalize your infrastructure that you're working with, the mineral processing mechanisms that you've adopted or developed or you're using now to separate a mineral from dirt and so forth and so on. And then the sphere, the sector itself, must be controlled by the state. And that's what we mean by nationalization. So currently, right now, minerals are not controlled by the state in South Africa. We can give you a mining license and you own whatever you find under that earth. We don't own it. So we must be able to nationalize in terms of competitively competing in that market, but also controlling all development in that sphere, all mineral processing in that sphere. And that's what we mean by nationalization. So the ownership part is what keeps on getting people bogged down. But the control part, the control of the banking sector, the control of the mining sector, the control of strategic sectors of the economy is what the second cardinal pillar of the EFF people speak about. It's not what people talk about, because those spheres are not only about ownership, but they're also about control, about regulation, and we're not in charge of that space. So nationalization also infers state capacity. So it's tied to that, because the cardinal pillars of the EFF are in sequence for a reason. Land expropriation without compensation, nationalization of mines and banks and key strategic sectors of the economy, building of state capacity. So they must be read in unison. And when you read them in isolation, things will look a bit dodgy.
Please, can you explain control to an ordinary person? Because control to me is 50% plus or 51%. So you told me we mustn't read them in isolation.